Good morning. Welcome to Bible study. Working through the book of Genesis still. This week we are going to keep walking through the life of Jacob. Not sure if I use this phrase online. I know in person last week we were talking about what comes around goes around. It seemed like Jacob, he cheated Esau, and then Laban lies to Jacob about which daughter he ends up marrying. And so you see that we see that there's some like animosity between Jacob and Laban. And that's going to continue on. So both chapters, we kind of have people fighting each other, not like physically, but like doing things, not treating each other well. Like chapter 30, you're going to see the two sisters. They're going to be jealous of one another. And we're going to see how that jealousy basically leads to all the different tribes. So I keep saying 12 tribes. Technically, I was trying to do the math in my head. I think it's technically 11. The confusing thing is later on, Joseph will have two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. Those become two of the 12 tribes. And then when we're talking land, Levi does not get land because Levi is the priestly tribe. And so there's some technical nuances. I'll just keep calling it 12 tribes. I got to actually sit down and count because you add a few, you lose a few. It should come out to 12. But we can sit down and I'll count the sons when we get through the end and see what we're at. I actually didn't do that. I was thinking that right as I sat down. I was like, I meant to do that and I didn't do that. So I'll count out the tribes together. And we can actually see, because I keep saying 12, but it might actually technically be 11, but I might be miscounting in my head. We'll figure that out in a moment. Let's go ahead and open up with a word of prayer. Dear Jesus, thank you for loving us. Remind us that even though we are sinful, you still love us and you still forgive us. And even though we are not perfect, you still use us to accomplish your ends. Guide us as we read through these couple chapters in the book of Genesis. We ask this in your name. Amen. Let's see here. Let's go ahead to Genesis 30. So backing up a section, just this last paragraph, the end of 29, Leah and Rachel. Leah is jealous of Rachel. So Rachel was always the woman that Jacob wanted to marry. And then Laban tricked him and he married Leah instead. And so Jacob worked, another 7 years. And so he can marry Rachel as well. So he's married to both sisters. And that Leah is naturally jealous of Rachel. And so then to kind of even things out, God opens the womb of Leah and closes the womb of Rachel. And so in that last paragraph, we see 4 of the sons being born. So it's Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. So those 4 are all born. So then going on in the beginning of chapter 30 now. When Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, she envied her sister. She said to Jacob, give me children or I shall die. Jacob's anger was kindled against Rachel. He said, am I in the place of God who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb? Then she said, here is my servant Bilhah. Go into her so that she may give birth on my behalf, that even I may have children through her. So she gave him her servant Bilhah as a wife, and Jacob went into her. And Bilhah conceived and bore Jacob a son. Then Rachel said, God has judged me and also heard my voice and given me a son. Therefore she called his name Dan. Rachel's servant Bilhah conceived again and bore Jacob a second son. Then Rachel said, with mighty wrestlings I have wrestled with my sister and I have prevailed. So she called his name Naphtali. So this is going kind of into these confusing, ancient, inheritance laws and rules, how they kind of viewed things. Because you typically you have your main wife of status. And then some of these men will be polygamous, have concubines, and typically though you want to know where your inheritance is going. And so typically that's going to go to the first son of your first wife, and you typically want to have that wife be of same status as you. And so you kind of keep these royal lines going. What's interesting though is there's this practice where you can have a servant and she can bear a child in place of that woman, in place of her master, essentially. So that's what's going on here. And so they're treating those sons of Bilhah as if they are sons of Rachel. So it seems very strange to us, very, very foreign. Keep in mind, these are customs that are very old. Most like most parts of the world kind of moved, like we don't practice these things anymore. I mean, we much more prefer monogamy. And so even like the marrying of the two sisters, that's kind of far from what we're used to. And on top of it is this. So it's very different. It's just a very, very different world. But Bilhah, she conceives, bears two sons, Dan and Naphtali. So I've been counting it up. We're up to 6 sons now. And it's interesting here in this these couple verses. So Rachel's not envious of Leah. Rachel wants her own sons, but she's barren. She's not having any. And her other sister, who she knows Jacob doesn't like as much, she's already had 4 sons. So jealous of one another. And so she, the way she decides to try to get around that is that she is going to raise Bilhah's sons as if they were her own. And so then Dan and Naphtali are born from Bilhah. So we see now we're up to 6, so we're getting there. So we already have quite a few sons. And what the other thing too is a lot of time is passing. So you got to think like, okay, 9-month pregnancy, and then like you have some time after, and then so like there's years and years and years going on here. And so we're kind of moving through time. So some of these kids are in it quite grown up by the time we get to the later kids, because like when we get into the story of Joseph, like Joseph himself is at least a teenager, if not in his 20s, which means like Reuben through Judah, those first 4. If Joseph is like, and I think I remember now, I'm pretty sure he was a teenager when they ditched him and left him in the empty well, empty cistern. So that would probably mean that, I mean, the oldest sons are at least in their mid-20s, if not older, if I'm doing that math right. So these are like grown men, like basically leaving a teenager to die. And so that's what will happen. We're getting to that later on. But note that like large family, which means there's going to be a large age gap between the oldest and the youngest son. So Dan and Naphtali are born to Bilhah, or born to Rachel through Bilhah, you could say. Verse 9. When Leah saw that she had ceased bearing children, she took her servant Zilpah and gave her to Jacob as a wife. Then Leah's servant Zilpah bore Jacob a son, and Leah said, "Good fortune has come." So she called his name Gad. Leah's servant Zilpah bore Jacob a second son, and Leah said, "Happy am I, for women have called me happy." So she called his name Asher. So 2 more now, so that's up to 8. So we're still seeing that Leah and Rachel are jealous of one another. So then Leah gives Zilpah onto Jacob as well. So now Jacob really has 4 wives, and that all of these sons will be equal heirs with one another. I mean, like usually give the most of the firstborn, but like they're all going to share in some of the inheritance, because the big thing is that all of them are going to have this blessing from Abraham, where through them it will God bless the world. So through this family of Abraham, originally going back to the original forefather, but now we're seeing like these blessings come out. So it's kind of coming out in a strange way, but we are seeing now the population multiply. So we go from Isaac to Jacob. Isaac had Esau and Jacob. Esau didn't really work out, but then Jacob now is having a bunch of different sons. And so each of those sons is now going to produce more kids, and it's going to really multiply from there. So we have Gad and Asher born to Zilpah now. In the days of wheat harvest, Reuben went and found mandrakes in the field and brought them to his mother Leah. Then Rachel said to Leah, "Please give me some of your son's mandrakes." But she said to her, "Is it a small matter that you have taken away my husband? Would you take away my son's mandrakes also?" Rachel said, "Then he may lie with you tonight in exchange for your son's mandrakes." When Jacob came in from the field in the evening, Leah went out to meet him and said, "You must come into me, for I've hired you with my son's mandrakes." So he lay with her that night. And God listened to Leah, and she conceived and bore Jacob a 5th son. Leah said, "God has given me my wages because I gave my servant to my husband." So she called his name Issachar. And so it's almost like they're bartering basically time with their husband. So it seems like they're at least the tents of Rachel and Leah would be close to one another. But it seems like they were kind of still fighting. And so like I don't know how all that works, but they must. So Rachel and Leah decided, okay, Leah, or Jacob's going to go with Leah tonight, and then that produces Issachar. So we're now up to, what was that, 9? Yeah, so that's going to be 9 sons now. So we're seeing that more and more sons are being born, and that this family dynamic, I mean, the relationship between Rachel and Leah is not good. So it's not a healthy relationship, obviously. And so like this jealousy is really spurning on the population increase of the kingdom of Israel. Verse 19. And Leah conceived again, and she bore Jacob a 6th son. Then Leah said, God has endowed me with a good endowment. Now my husband will honor me because I have borne him 6 sons. So she called his name Zebulun. Afterwards, she bore a daughter and called her name Dinah. So Zebulun, so we're 9. So Zebulun is 10. So we're almost done. And then a daughter is mentioned. Like we can presume there have been daughters born. So we're focused on like lineage. So it's going through men. But we can presume that there are daughters being born. It does say Rachel's womb is barren, so I presume she is not having any daughters. Let me just specifically say that she bore Jacob no children. Yeah, so that'd be no kids at all. But you would think that Leah would be having daughters, and some of these concubines would be having daughters as well. Dinah is mentioned by name because she will be brought up in a later chapter. So she there's a whole chapter about her we'll get to in a little bit. But that's why she's mentioned here. So this is when she shows up in amongst all these different kids being born. 22. And God remembered Rachel, and God listened to her and opened her womb. She conceived and bore a son and said, God has taken away my reproach. And she called his name Joseph, saying, may the Lord add to me another son. So Joseph is number 11. And because Joseph is born to Rachel, we'll see that Joseph is highly favored by Jacob. Because while like Jacob will honor like who the firstborn is and all that, he's still going to pander and favor to the son of Rachel. He probably always wished the firstborn was through Rachel. And so Joseph is number 11. And so that's where we'll end with the kids today. Number 12 is Benjamin. So there were 12. I thought there were 12 sons because I was second guessing myself when you did all the counting. But now I think about it, you remove 2 because you're removing Levi and Joseph because really Levi is getting a special treatment because he becomes the priestly tribe. The reason for that is later on, after the Exodus, when the people of Israel are out in the Sinai, you have the whole golden calf episode. The sons of Levi are the ones that remain true and don't worship the calf. So they actually become the priests. Also, Moses and Aaron are descended from Levi. So they're from the house of Levi. So they're kind of exempt from the whole 12 tribes, like parceling out the land. The land gets split up 12 different ways. Levi is exempt, and they go and fill all the different 12 tribes, and they have their own places in the various cities around there for people to worship, because they're the main priests. And then Joseph, his 2 sons receive equal blessings with Joseph's brothers. So really, it's like Joseph is receiving a double blessing. We see how Joseph is still favored by his son. So Ephraim and Manasseh are the other 2 tribes. And so you can see like, okay, so you subtract Levi and Joseph, you add in Ephraim and Manasseh. That's how you get the 12 tribes of Israel. So Jacob will have 12 sons, but there isn't a one-to-one correspondence with the 12 sons and the 12 tribes. And we'll see that again when we get to the end of Genesis, when Jacob's dying and he's blessing all of his sons. But I thought I'd cover that a bit now because this is the other main time where we actually get a nice list of all the sons being born. I mean, Benjamin will come later, we got most of them here, so it's good to talk about that. So most of these simply become the 12 tribes, but there's a few exceptions with Joseph and Levi. So then moving on to verse 25. As soon as Rachel had borne Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, send me away that I may go to my own home and country. Give me my wives, my children, for whom I have served you, that I may go, for you know that service that I have given you. But Laban said to him, if I have found favor in your sight, I have learned by divination that the Lord has blessed me because of you. Name your wages, and I will give it. Jacob said to him, You yourself know I have served you, and how your livestock has fared with me. For you had little before I came, and it has increased abundantly. And Lord has blessed you wherever I turn. But now when shall I provide for my own house also? He said, What shall I give you? Jacob said, You shall not give me anything. If you will do this for me, I will again pasture your flock and keep it. Let me pass through all your flock today, removing from it every speckled and spotted sheep and every black lamb, and the spotted and speckled among the goats, and they shall be my wages. So my honesty will answer for me later when you come to look into my wages with you. Everyone that is not speckled and spotted among the goats and black among the lambs, if it found with me, shall be counted stolen. Laban said, Good, let it be as you have said. But that day Laban removed the male goats that were striped and spotted, and all the female goats that were speckled and spotted, every one that had white on it, and every lamb that was black, and put them in charge of his sons. And he set a distance of 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob pastured the rest of Laban's flock. So what's going on here is it says, as soon as Rachel bore Joseph. So you get the idea that Jacob, he hasn't really moved beyond like Laban. He's still working with Laban. So they must have at least a decent working relationship, even though Laban kind of tricked him with the whole Leah and Rachel thing. So he's still working for him. But now that Rachel bore a son, you get this idea that Jacob, his mind has kind of changed where, okay, I kind of have everything I wanted. And at this point, like, I'm too old to really be like this son-in-law, like subservient to my father-in-law kind of relationship where, like he says, where is that? When will I basically provide for my own household? He's basically saying, look, we are all relying on you. You own all the flocks. So like Jacob technically is poor because they're basically living off of Laban. So that's how he's really supporting his family. And Jacob says, look, I can't live here forever. I need to go back to my lands, my area, basically the promised land. Because he has land promised to him through Isaac. He needs to get back to his son because things go through from father to son. So if you have like a father-in-law and a son-in-law working like this, the son-in-law will eventually want to go back to the land of his own father. And because things pass through men, like really like those Leah and Rachel, now they are in the household of Jacob because they're married to him. Like they're still, of course, their father's daughters, but as far as which household they're in Jacob's household. Now, you'd see Jacob and Laban as two separate households. The problem is if Jacob left right now, he really wouldn't have anything. He wouldn't really have any livestock or anything. So he'd be very poor. He'd be essentially sentencing his family to death. He'd have to somehow be able to survive and make money or be able to produce livestock and raise livestock of some kind. So Jacob needs to separate himself from Laban, and he plans on doing that. And he basically says, look, can I take some of your sheep off your hands? These will be mine, and then you can keep the rest. And so he says the ones that are speckled and spotted and every black lamb, those are the ones that I will keep, and then you can keep the rest. And so Laban agrees to that, but then Laban double crosses him again. And so then Laban immediately goes and removes all of the sheep and goats that would have been rightfully Jacob's. And so that when Jacob gets back to pasture Laban's flock, there aren't any speckled and spotted lambs. They're all like the pure white colored ones. So there aren't any. So Jacob probably realized what happened because he would have known about how many would have been in each category. And so Laban says, okay, well, we're going to keep these. And so we're just going to keep Jacob for as long as possible because they're prospering now that Jacob's working for them. They're making more money. They're not really money, but they're making more and more lambs, more livestock because God is blessing Jacob. And so therefore God is blessing Laban. And so we see how Laban basically cheats Jacob once again. So Jacob, though, he himself is crafty. I mean, he tricked Esau before. He can get back at Laban. And so this next paragraph is kind of talking about how Jacob gets back at Laban. So verse 37. Then Jacob took fresh sticks of poplar and almond and plane trees and peeled white streaks in them, exposing the white of the sticks. He set the sticks that he had peeled in front of the flocks in the troughs, that is, the watering places where the flocks came to drink. And since they bred when they came to drink, the flocks bred in front of the sticks, and so the flocks brought forth striped, speckled, and spotted. And Jacob separated the lambs and set the face of the flocks toward the striped, and all the black in the flock of Laban. He put his own droves apart and did not put them with Laban's flock. Whenever the stronger of the flock were breeding, Jacob would lay the sticks in troughs before the eyes of the flock, that they might breed among the sticks. But for the feebler of the flock, he would not lay them there. So the feebler would be Laban's, and the stronger Jacob's. Thus the man increased greatly and had large flocks, female servants and male servants, and camels and donkeys. So what's Jacob doing with these sticks here? So he basically takes some sticks, marks them a certain way, and then he takes the flock, the choice members of the flock that he likes, that are producing speckled and spotted, and is breeding them with the other stronger pairs. And so he's using those sticks to mark two different groups. The stronger sheep and goats, he purposely breeds in the stronger groups. And then the weaker groups, he lets them breed to their own devices. And so what he's doing here is he is purposefully breeding the better sheeps and lambs amongst his own area. So like he has like the special designated area where he keeps a close watch on which lambs are breeding with each other, so they can produce the better stock in the end. So he wants the best ones for himself. So like if you remember from high school biology, like with heredity and like all that stuff, I don't remember a whole lot from that, but like certain traits are dominant and recessive. And so like they wouldn't know those terms back then, but they knew like, hey, if you breed these two colors together or these two patterns together, you'll get this pattern or this color. And like if these two are strong, they're going to produce strong offspring. So like a lot of times we think the ancients are dumb, they don't know a whole lot, but like in reality, like they knew quite a bit. Like think about like some of the structures they made, like the pyramids or Stonehenge, that are like perfectly aligned with like the stars. So they were able to measure and calculate things like that, and they would have known, especially like when all they're doing is raising livestock, they would have noticed pretty fast that like, hey, they pass these traits on. If you breed the strong with the strong, you're going to get a strong offspring most of the time. And so what Jacob is doing here is sensible. He's been left to his own from Laban, is he's making sure that the sheep he gets to keep are better than Laban's flock. And so once again, Jacob kind of cheats someone else. But this is after Laban had cheated Jacob. So Jacob's kind of now getting back at Laban. And so Jacob is producing the flock that he really wants, that will make sure that he remains prosperous for as long as possible. And you wonder too, if like part of this is God, of course, blessing Jacob against Laban. The other part of it is you wonder if Laban just didn't notice some of these things, where Laban wasn't as good at breeding the flock. And so once Jacob took over some of these things, Jacob noticed these things, and that's why the flock really prospered under him instead of Laban, or it was all miraculous by God. But it's kind of those two things working in tandem as I see it. And in the end, Jacob has the better flock. So he's going to have all these nice striped and speckled ones, and all the plain colored ones are going to be weaker. And so Jacob will have the good ones for himself. And so that is his plan. Next, chapter 31. Now Jacob heard that the sons of Laban were saying, Jacob has taken all that was our father's, and from what was our father's he has gained all this wealth. And Jacob saw that Laban did not regard him with favor as before. Then the Lord said to Jacob, return to the land of your fathers and to your kindred, and I will be with you. So you get the idea. More time has gone by. We'll see it's about 6 years, because he'll say, I was with you 14 years for your daughters and 6 more years for your flock. So he spends another 6 years breeding sheep and goats. And so at this time, like the sons of Laban, of course, are keeping an eye on Jacob. And they're going to see like, well, our father promised him these colored sheep. He once again has these speckled sheep. So he somehow got them back. And the speckled sheep look a lot better than the sheep that are going to be our dad's and ours later on. So what's going on with that? And so that's going to make the sons angry. And that they're also thinking, well, dad should really be passing on all this livestock to us, not the son-in-law. So they're going to see that as wrong too. So there's going to be a lot of jealousy between the sons and Jacob. So Jacob's getting this idea, okay, it's not really safe here. So it's kind of like Esau all over again. It wasn't safe to stay near Esau. He's got to get away from Esau, go to Laban. Well, now it's not really safe to stay with Laban and his son. So now he needs to go back to the land of his kindred. And on top of that, God is going to give him the go ahead as well. God himself will remind him, I'm going to be with you. You'll be safe. But it's time for you to go back to the promised land. So that's kind of all that's going on between Laban and God and Jacob. So then verse 4. So Jacob sent and called Rachel and Leah into the field where his flock was and said to them, I see that your father does not regard me with favor as he did before, but the God of my father has been with me. You know that I have served your father with all my strength, yet your father has cheated me and changed my wages 10 times. But God did not permit him to harm me. If he said, the spotted shall be your wages, and all the flock bore spotted. And if he said, the striped shall be your wages, and all the flock bore striped. Thus God has taken away the livestock of your father and given them to me. In the breeding season of the flock, I lifted up my eyes and saw in a dream the goats that mated with the flock were striped, spotted, and mottled. Then the angel of God said to me in the dream, Jacob. And I said, here I am. And he said, lift up your eyes and see, all the goats that mate with the flock are striped, spotted, and mottled, for I have seen all that Laban is doing to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar and made a vow to me. Now arise, go out from this land and return to the land of your kindred. Then Rachel and Leah answered and said to him, is there any portion or inheritance left to us in our father's house? Are we not regarded by him as foreigners? For he has sold us, and he has indeed devoured our money. All the wealth that God has taken away from our father belongs to us and our children. Now then, whatever God has said to you, do. So here we get more of an explanation of how God has worked for Jacob here, how he has enabled him to reproduce all these livestock. And so even when it didn't make sense, because you get the idea that Jacob before, he kind of knew how to breed them, but also there are simply times that when the livestock shouldn't have produced those colors, they did. So you get the idea that God is also at hand working with Jacob to take this flock away from Laban, because Laban changed the wages 10 times. And so what that meant was that Laban would notice that, wait, Jacob's got all these spotted sheep. How did he get all these spotted sheep? Well, I don't want him to take all my flock from me. So then he tells Jacob, well, your wages now, you get to take the striped sheep. And so then now Jacob technically doesn't have the spotted sheep. And then the next time Laban comes around, all the sheep are suddenly striped. And so then Laban changes the wages again. So you get the idea, Laban doesn't like that Jacob keeps coming away with most of the flock. And Laban's trying to stop that. And we get this animosity between Laban and Jacob. But no matter what, between Jacob's practices, between the power of God, Jacob always comes out on top. And on top of it, Rachel and Leah are kind of angry because they're saying our father's treating us as foreigners. He should be also giving us he should be helping us a little bit at least here. Even though technically we don't get inheritance as daughters, but still you still care for your kids. And especially since their husband is working for their father, he should be treating Jacob essentially as another son. And he's not. He is mistreating him. And eventually he's trying to make sure that Jacob is always just working for him. Because he knows Jacob is trying to get away. So they're trying. So they basically just tell Jacob, go do what you have to do in order that you can gain wealth for us, so that we can leave, go back to your land, Jacob, and that way we can just have our family, our household, and prosper. So that's what's going on here. So you see, once again, Laban cheating Jacob more. So verse 17. So Jacob arose and set his sons and his wives on camels. He drove away all his livestock, all his property. He had gained the livestock in his possession. He had acquired in Padan Aram to go to the land of Canaan to his father Isaac. Laban had gone to shear his sheep, and Rachel stole her father's household gods. And Jacob tricked Laban the Aramean by not telling him that he intended to flee. He fled with all he had and arose and crossed the Euphrates and set his face toward the hill country of Gilead. So he sets everyone. So he takes everything and leaves. So he's going west and then south across the Euphrates down into the land of the Jordan, down into the promised land of Israel. Laban was away. And so he tricks Laban by just leaving and not telling him where they're going or anything. So that's how he tricks him. And we get that other verse, Rachel stole her father's household gods. So that's an interesting verse there for a few reasons. One, Rachel is stealing something from her father. And two, It's these idols. So you can see now, okay, Laban, even though like they were from like the same tribe as Abraham, Laban had also been worshiping other gods. And Rachel wants to keep doing that. This is going to cause problems later on in this chapter and elsewhere. And we can see that they're not perfectly worshiping the one true God. Where Jacob, of course, wants to do that. He wants to worship Yahweh. But Rachel, there's some questions there. She seems to also want to worship her father's household gods. And we also see how why God was always blessing Jacob and not Laban. Because Laban, while he blessed Jacob according to his God, Laban also was worshiping other gods. So we see now that they're not entirely fully devoted and aligned to the one true God. Which this brings up a whole other topic I haven't brought up before, because in our day and age, a lot of times we think of things like I mean, for us, we think like we worship the one true God, the triune God, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, as revealed to us through God's Son, through Jesus. So we think of things in terms of monotheism and polytheism. So we think of things like, so we are monotheistic, meaning we worship one God. And then we think, well, other religions like Hinduism is kind of the easy, big example. That's polytheistic, meaning they worship many gods. And so we kind of think of those as the two main differences. What's going on here in the ancient world, and what actually even goes on in India with Hinduism, is that polytheism has its own like subsets and types, where like if you look at monotheism, there's different monotheistic religions. Like Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are three monotheistic religions. They're all related. They're all the Abrahamic religions as well. But they're all monotheistic because they all worship one God. Now the three different religions will claim they worship, like it's similar, but we do worship different gods, because like even though Christianity comes out of Judaism, the Jews will not acknowledge Jesus as God. And so we say, well, God's triune. One of those persons is the Son. You must acknowledge the Son as God. Therefore, even though we use the same holy book, your definition, your idea of who God is wrong, because you do not acknowledge Jesus as God. The same with Islam, the same with the Muslims, is that they don't acknowledge Jesus as God. They also, though, say they worship the same God as the Jews, as us Christians. They say we're the ones that are wrong. And so we as Christians, though, we typically say Jews and Muslims do not worship the same God, because we say that God was always triune, and namely we are worshiping the Son of God, Jesus, as revealed to us in the Gospels. So that's where those differences are. Those are monotheistic religions, and throughout time, most religions are polytheistic, but there always have been some that fall in different categories. If you like certain forms of Buddhism. So like when you get into Eastern religions, these categories are a bit different too, but there's some forms of Buddhism that some might say are monotheistic. So that would not be an Abrahamic religion. Just think of another example. If they actually worship Buddha as God and claim Buddha is the one God. But there's some other differences with Buddhism and Hinduism, where like even some Hindus might claim to be monotheistic in a weird way if they claim everything is one and everything is God. And so then they will themselves say they're monotheistic. So it's just the East has much different ways of viewing things than the West. And so some of these categories just don't work, and they just completely change. But where I'm trying to get to is there's other forms of polytheism, or there's subsets of polytheism. And the main subset of polytheism that's still even practiced today in parts of India, as well as in the ancient world, was henotheism. So Heno theism. And what henotheism is it's the belief that there are many different gods. There's all these different gods out there, but I'm going to devote and worship one of these gods, because worshiping this one God seems to be what works for me. Or this is my patron God of my craft. I'm going to devote myself to that God. Or this is the patron God of my culture, my tribe, my people. I'm going to worship this God because I am this people. And this God is stronger than the God of the other people over there, or the gods of those people over there. So what henotheism basically is saying is all these different gods are real, and you can kind of pick and choose who you worship, whichever one is best for you. And so that is what Rachel is doing here by taking her father's household gods. is that she's saying, well, it's fine that my husband goes and worships Yahweh. That's his God. That worked great for him. He's clearly gotten all this flock, so it's clearly working out. But I always felt that I had better luck with, and it doesn't name who those gods are, but I have better luck with these gods. So I'm going to take them and keep worshiping them. And that, of course, is problematic because we know, okay, well, God is the one true God. And so she is worshiping these false idols. So we know that Rachel's kind of falling astray, kind of following after Laban, the same way Laban fell astray. So this is going to lead to problems. And this was like the view throughout the ancient world of henotheism, where each country has their own set of gods and you worship them. And you might, like in that pantheon, you might prefer one against all the other in your pantheon of your culture. And you're certainly going to prefer your entire pantheon over the pantheon of someone else's culture. And that's what's going on here. She doesn't want to completely leave these household gods behind. And instead, she wants to worship them in addition to the one true God. That's something, too, where a lot of times, especially us in the West, we see things as an either or, where like, okay, I'm a Christian. I worship I worship Yahweh. I worship Jesus. I worship the Trinity. So I worship him. And that means I don't worship other gods. If you talk to a Hindu, they will tell you that Jesus is a God they worship. They will also call themselves Christian because they worship Jesus. And that's something that is kind of foreign to us, but because they see all of these different gods as equal to one another, you can kind of pick and choose. They would say, well, your Christians are just a form of Hinduism that chooses to worship Jesus. And so you can see now how they categorize things versus the way we categorize things. So Jesus is one God among many. And so you can see how we're saying, no, Jesus is the one true God. There are no other gods besides him. We got to listen to him. Whereas they would say, no, he's one among many. There's all of these different gods. You can pick and choose who you really like, who likes you. And so that's what's going on here in the ancient world is she's almost certainly worshiping Yahweh as well, but she also wants to keep worshiping these other gods too. So you get the idea that she wants to kind of not really play both sides, but she just, or in that sense of getting what she wants in this earthly life from all these different sources. So she wants to worship all these different gods. So that's what's going on here. That was kind of her mindset. It's kind of the ancient mindset. And that also gives us a picture as to how, like, especially like Hindus see things. Because I was trying to think of all the different polytheistic religions, but Hinduism is kind of the main one. Because I was struggling to think of others, because most are branches off from Hinduism, because Buddhism is really kind of another form of Hinduism. And so all those Eastern religions kind of work together. And then like in the East as well, you get ancestor worship, which is kind of different from Hinduism and Buddhism. And then you have like Confucianism, which is more of a philosophy. Shinto in Japan, which also like there isn't really a god. You have ancestor worship mixed with like the love of nature. So some of these Eastern religions are just a bit different. You have Sikhism, which that one's kind of like a cross between Hinduism and Christianity, because it's kind of like Hinduism, but with like a holy scripture that they really utilize in their worship. And so some, I think, describe Sikhs as monotheistic, but I don't know as much off the top of my head. I kind of look more about Hinduism, but Sikhism is another big Eastern religion. A lot of interesting stuff. Any questions about that, let me know. But that's kind of what came to mind was reading the Statement of Household Gods. 22. When it was told Laban on the third day that Jacob had fled, he took his kinsman with him and pursued him for 7 days and followed close after him into the hill country of Gilead. But God came to Laban the Aramean in a dream by night and said to him, "Be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad." And Laban overtook Jacob. Now Jacob had pitched his tent in the hill country, and Laban with his kinsmen pitched tents in the hill country of Gilead. And Laban said to Jacob, "What have you done that you have tricked me and driven away my daughters like captives of the sword? Why did you flee secretly and trick me and did not tell me, so that I might have sent you away with mirth and songs, with tambourine and lyre? And why did you not permit me to kiss my sons and my daughters farewell? Now you have done foolishly. It is in my power to do you harm. But the God of your father spoke to me last night, saying, 'Be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad.' And now you have gone away because you long greatly for your father's house. But why did you steal my gods?" Jacob answered and said to Laban, "Because I was afraid, for I thought that you would take your daughters from me by force. Anyone with whom you find your gods shall not live. In the presence of our kinsmen, point out what I have that is yours, and take it. Now Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen them. So Laban hears that Jacob's gone, but then God warns him in a dream to not say anything to Jacob, either good or bad. So don't basically stop him, but don't say anything good either. And Laban kind of doesn't listen to God, because he says, well, you didn't have to flee secretly from me. We would have had a big party before you left. And Jacob says, well, I thought that you would have taken your daughters from me if I had left. Because there's not a good relationship between Laban and Jacob. So you wonder, is Laban telling the truth if they would have had a party or not? Maybe they would, maybe they won't. Because the relationship between Laban and Jacob's rocky. We don't know if Laban's telling the truth. And that's why God don't tell him good or bad. Because Jacob has a right to go back, and Laban is treating him wrongly. God is getting Jacob away from Laban. And so Jacob's going to perceive this as a lie. So don't bother lying to Jacob. Just let him go. And so that's what God is telling Laban to do. But Laban, of course, says his line about having a party before they go. Why didn't you let me kiss my sons and daughters farewell? It's in my power to do you harm, but I'm not going to because God told me not to. But why did you take my household gods? And so Jacob says, well, I didn't think you're going to let me go easy. That's why I left. But I didn't know anything about these household gods being stolen. Whoever has them, we will put to death. They will not live. So he's saying that, yeah, this theft is wrong. I want to show you that I'm being true to you. I did not mean to take this. And so by the price of death, I will kill whoever it is that took them and give them back to you. He did not know Rachel stole them. So verse 33. So Laban went to Jacob's tent and to Leah's tent and into the tent of the two female servants and did not find them. And he went out of Leah's tent and entered Rachel's. Now Rachel had taken the household gods and put them in the camel's saddle and sat on them. Laban felt all about the tent but did not find them. And she said to her father, let not my lord be angry that I cannot rise before you, for the way of women is upon me. So he searched but did not find the household gods. So the way Rachel tricks her father is that she sits on the idols and says, the way of women's upon me, don't bother me, I'm not going to get up. So he is fine. And so he kind of just works around Rachel and doesn't find these household gods. And so that kind of confuses him. Where did they go? And Rachel successfully tricks her father and steals the household gods. And no one knows where they are. So Jacob's completely doesn't know this. And Laban's confused where they went to. And so he does this full search, does not find them. So Rachel succeeds in hiding these household gods, which is going to cause problems later on. Rachel's going to keep on worshiping these other gods, making God angry. So Laban does not find them. So verse 36, then Jacob became angry and berated Laban. Jacob said to Laban, what is my offense? What is my sin that you have hotly pursued me? For you have felt through all my goods, and what have you found of all your household goods? Set it here before my kinsmen and your kinsmen, that they may decide between us two. These 20 years I've been with you. Your ewes and your female goats have not miscarried, and I have not eaten the rams of your flocks. What was torn by wild beasts I did not bring to you. I bore the loss of it myself. From my hand you required it, whether stolen by day or stolen by night. There I was by day, the heat consumed me, and in the cold by night, and my sleep fled from my eyes. These 20 years I've been in your house. I served you 14 years for your 2 daughters and 6 years for your flock. And you have changed my wages 10 times. If the God of my father, God of Abraham, the fear of Isaac had not been on my side, surely now you would have sent me away empty-handed. God saw my affliction, the labor of my hands, and rebuked you last night. So Laban comes up empty-handed, and now Jacob's mad at him. You accuse me of stealing, and you've been changing my wages 10 times. You've lied to me multiple times. Clearly, God has decided that he prefers me to you. That let God's judgment stand. God judges me as innocent, you as being guilty. So now let me go. I am going to leave. I've worked for you 20 years. And so Jacob basically makes a stand. And now he is going to leave Laban. So verse 43. Then Laban answered and said to Jacob, the daughters are my daughters, the children are my children, the flocks are my flocks, and all that you see is mine. But what can I do this day for these my daughters or for their children whom they have borne? Come now, let us make a covenant, you and I. Let it be witness between you and me. So Jacob took a stone and set it up as a pillar. And Jacob said to his kinsmen, gather stones. And they took stones and made a heap, and they ate there by the heap. Laban called it Jekarsa Hadutha, but Jacob called it Gilead. Laban said, this heap is a witness between you and me today, Therefore he named it Gilead and Mizpah, for he said, the Lord watch between you and me when we are out of one another's sight. If you oppress my daughters or take wives beside my daughters, although no one is with us, God is witness between you and me. So Laban now knows that he'll be saying goodbye to his daughters, all his grandkids. And he's basically saying, okay, well, let's put this altar up, this stone pillar up as a witness, saying that if Jacob mistreats his wives or anyone else, that God will know, and so let God be a witness to kind of watch in my stead. So God is going to look over my daughters in my stead over Jacob. So that way Jacob treats them well. So that's Laban's concern. And so like he's pointing out that like all these things were mine, but now he's kind of passing them on to Jacob. So like Laban had agreed to the terms that the daughters would be his, that would be Jacob's, and that some of the flock would be his. Jacob's going to keep all of that, and Laban will take what is his. So we can see now that they're coming to a deal. So verse 51. Then Laban said to Jacob, see this heap and the pillar which I have set between you and me. This heap is a witness, and the pillar is a witness, that I will not pass over this heap to you, and you will not pass over this heap and this pillar to me to do harm. The God of Abraham and the God of Nahor, the God of their father, judge between us. So Jacob swore by the fear of his father Isaac, and Jacob offered a sacrifice in the hill country and called his kinsmen to eat bread. They ate bread and spent the night in the hill country. Early in the morning, Laban arose and kissed his grandchildren and his daughters and blessed them. Then Laban departed and returned home. So they agree that the heap will be a witness, and that they will honor that, and they won't cross this boundary. So they'll have the northern areas will be Laban's, the southern will be Jacob's. God of Nahor. Nahor was Laban's grandfather. That's just reminding them, like, so Laban's grandfather, this would have been a relative of Abraham. So reminding them that Abraham, Nahor, they served the same God, and that Laban now had kind of gone astray worshiping other gods. So Jacob swearing by those. So Jacob swearing by the God of Isaac, and that too. So they're swearing by the one true God, and that way that he will be the one that judges between them. So we see that as the end of Laban. So then Laban will go his way, Jacob will go his, and then Jacob will be headed back south. And so next week, Jacob will have another concern because he's going back into Esau's territory. So Jacob will be a big concern to them there. So we'll see how that all plays out. Let's go ahead and close with a word of prayer. Dear Jesus, thank you for reminding us of your love, that even though we may lie or cheat and deceive, Lord, you forgive us. So help us to repent of those sins. Help us to treat one another well, treat one another rightly without jealousy or envy or lying or cheating. But teach us to be right, to live according to your law, and remind us that we are forgiven and we will live forever with you. We ask this in your name, Jesus. Amen. Thank you, and have a wonderful week.